Blood dripped from Emeka's fist as he stared at the broken window, sirens wailing in the distance. The cool night air hit his face, a stark contrast to the heated chaos inside the school building. How did it come to this? As the blue and red lights flickered in the darkness, Emeka's mind raced back to where it all began. In the small village of Umuahia, nestled in the heart of Nigeria, Emeka was known as the troublemaker. At just 15, he had already earned a reputation that made mothers pull their children close when he walked by and old men shake their heads in disappointment. His parents, once respected members of the community, now bore the weight of shame brought on by their son's actions. Emeka's father, Chaku, was a stern man who believed in discipline and hard work. He had built a small but successful business selling palm oil, and he expected his only son to follow in his footsteps. Emeka's mother, Adana, was gentler, always trying to see the good in her boy even when others couldn't. But as Emeka grew older, his behavior worsened. He started small, stealing mangoes from Mama Nkechi's tree, then graduated to swiping money from his mother's purse. Lies fell from his lips as easily as raindrops in the wet season. Fights became a regular occurrence, his knuckles constantly bruised and bloodied. One hot afternoon, Chaku found Emeka behind the village school, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he shared a bottle of cheap gin with older boys. The shame and anger that flashed across his father's face was something Emeka would never forget. That night, as crickets chirped outside their modest home, Chaku and Adana sat at the kitchen table, their voices low but urgent. "We can't control him anymore," Chaku said, his calloused hands clenched into fists. "He's bringing shame to our family name." Adana wiped a tear from her cheek. "He's just a boy, Chaku. He needs guidance, not punishment." "Guidance?" Chaku scoffed. "We've tried everything. The village school can't handle him. He needs discipline, structure." They argued long into the night, but in the end, they both knew there was only one solution. The next morning, Chaku announced their decision to Emeka. "You're going to St. Augustine's boarding school," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is for your own good." Emeka felt a mix of fear and excitement. He had heard stories about boarding schools, strict rules, but also freedom from constant parental supervision. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. The day Emeka left for St. Augustine's, the entire village seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. As Chaku's old pickup truck rattled down the dirt road, Emeka watched his home disappear in a cloud of red dust. St. Augustine's loomed before them, a sprawling compound of faded yellow buildings surrounded by a high wall topped with barbed wire. The iron gates creaked open, and Emeka felt a chill despite the warm day. "Remember why you're here," Chaku said as he dropped Emeka off at the administration building. "This is your chance to become a man we can be proud of." Emeka nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As the gates closed behind his father's truck, he felt truly alone for the first time in his life. The first few weeks at St. Augustine's were a shock to Emeka's system. Wake-up calls at 5 a.m., cold showers, endless rules and regulations. He shared a cramped dormitory with 11 other boys, each as lost and homesick as he was. At first, Emeka tried to behave. He attended classes, did his chores, and kept his head down. But the strict routine chafed against his free spirit, and soon he found himself looking for ways to rebel. It started small, sneaking extra food from the dining hall, skipping evening prayers to smoke behind the dormitories. But everything changed the night he met Chidi. Chidi was a year older than Emeka, with a sly smile and eyes that seemed to know all the school secrets. Emeka first saw him slipping out of the dormitory after lights out, moving like a shadow in the darkness. Curiosity piqued, Emeka followed him. Chidi led him to a hidden spot behind the science labs where a group of boys had gathered. The acrid smell of cigarette smoke filled the air, mixed with something sweeter that Emeka couldn't identify. Well, Chidi said, noticing Emeka. Looks like we've got fresh meat. What's your name, boy? Emeka, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Chidi looked him up and down, then grinned. You look like you could use some real fun. Tired of playing by the rules? Emeka nodded, feeling a thrill of excitement. Then stick with me, kid. I'll show you how to really enjoy this place. That night was Emeka's first taste of true rebellion at St. Augustine's. Chidi showed him how to pick the lock on the dormitory door, how to avoid the night watchman's rounds, and where to find the blind spots in the school's security cameras. As the weeks passed, Emeka became a regular member of Chidi's crew. They called themselves the Night Owls, and they ruled the school after dark. Emeka learned to pick pockets with nimble fingers, to lie convincingly to teachers and prefects, and to fight dirty when cornered. But it was the night Chidi took them beyond the school walls that Emeka truly felt alive. Using a loose section of fencing hidden behind overgrown bushes, they slipped into the town beyond. The nightclub was called the Blue Lagoon, a pulsing neon oasis in the quiet town. Chidi knew the bouncer, who let them in with a wink and a handshake that Emeka later learned concealed a folded bill. Inside, the music was so loud Emeka could feel it in his bones. Bodies writhed on the dance floor, a mass of sweat and movement. At the bar, Chidi ordered them drinks, strong, sweet concoctions that made Emeka's head swim. To freedom, Chidi shouted over the music, raising his glass. Emeka echoed the toast, downing his drink in one gulp. The burn in his throat was quickly replaced by a warm, floating sensation. A girl appeared at Emeka's side, older and more sophisticated than any he had known in his village. She pulled him onto the dance floor, her body moving against his in ways that made his pulse race. As the night wore on, Emeka lost himself in the music, the alcohol, and the intoxicating sense of adulthood. This, he thought, was what it meant to truly live. The sun was peeking over the horizon when they finally snuck back into the school grounds. Emeka collapsed into his bed, head spinning, but with a grin plastered on his face. He was hooked. From that night on, Emeka's transformation was complete. He became Chidi's right-hand man, always ready for the next scheme or adventure. His grades plummeted as he spent his days sleeping off hangovers and his nights exploring the dark underbelly of both the school and the town. It was Chidi who introduced Emeka to the true power structure at St. Augustine's. The Night Owls weren't just a group of rebellious students, they were part of a larger organization that stretched back generations. It's time you became a real member, Chidi told him one night, a glint in his eye that made Emeka both excited and uneasy. Deep in the woods behind the school, in a clearing lit by flickering torches, Emeka found himself surrounded by hooded figures. The air was thick with incense and an underlying current of danger. Brothers, Chidi's voice rang out, we have a candidate who wishes to join our ranks. Emeka, are you prepared to swear your loyalty to the eternal flame? Emeka's heart pounded in his chest, but he managed to croak out a yes. What followed was a blur of chanting, strange symbols drawn on his skin, and a bitter liquid that burned his throat. As the ceremony reached its climax, Emeka felt a surge of power course through him. He was no longer just a troublemaker from a small village, he was part of something greater, something dangerous and thrilling. With his initiation complete, Emeka threw himself fully into the world of the night owls. He learned the secret handshakes, the coded language, and the hidden passages that allowed them to move unseen through the school. But power came with a price. The night owls weren't just about having fun, they controlled a complex web of extortion, theft, and intimidation that kept them at the top of the school's hierarchy. Emeka found himself doing things that would have horrified his younger self, beating up younger students for their pocket money, breaking into the headmaster's office to steal exam papers, even dealing drugs to the desperate and addicted. As Emeka sank deeper into this dark world, there was one bright spot in his life, Emeka. She was a girl from his literature class, with kind eyes and a laugh that made Emeka's heart skip a beat. Unlike the girls at the Blue Lagoon, Emeka was genuine, intelligent, and unimpressed by Emeka's bad boy persona. At first, Emeka saw Emeka as a challenge, another conquest to add to his growing list. But as they spent more time together, studying in the library or talking under the big mango tree in the schoolyard, he found himself opening up to her in ways he never had before. "Why do you run with Chidi and his crew?" Emeka asked him one day, her voice filled with concern. "You're smarter than that, Emeka. You could be so much more." For a moment, Emeka felt a flicker of his old self, the boy who had dreamed of making his parents proud. But then he remembered the thrill of the night, the power he wielded, and he pushed the feeling away. "You wouldn't understand," he told her, his voice harsher than he intended. "This is who I am now." Emeka looked at him sadly. "No, it's not. This isn't the real you, Emeka. I hope you realize that before it's too late." Her words haunted him, but not enough to change his course. Emeka continued his double life, the dutiful student by day, the wild rebel by night. When he went home for holidays, he put on a show of reformation that fooled his parents completely. "See how the boarding school has helped you," his mother said, hugging him tightly. "You've become the son we always knew you could be." Emeka felt a twinge of guilt at her words, but he pushed it aside. They didn't understand the real world, he told himself. He was living life to the fullest, experiencing things they could never imagine. Back at school, things began to escalate. The night owls, emboldened by their success, started taking bigger risks. It was Emeka who came up with the plan to get revenge on Mr. Okafor, the strictest teacher in the school. Mr. Okafor had caught several of the night owls smoking and had them publicly caned. The humiliation burned in Emeka's mind, fueling his desire for payback. "We need to teach him a lesson," Emeka told the group, his eyes glittering with malice. "Something he'll never forget." The plan was simple but effective. They covered the floor outside Mr. Okafor's office with a thin layer of oil, nearly invisible in the dim hallway light. Then they waited. The next morning, they heard a shout followed by a sickening thud. Mr. Okafor had slipped and fallen hard, his head cracking against the concrete floor. The sight of the stern teacher being carried away on a stretcher, blood seeping through a bandage on his head, filled Emeka with a twisted sense of satisfaction. But the triumph was short-lived. The school administration launched an investigation, and soon the police were involved. As the net tightened around them, the night owls began to turn on each other. Chidi, always looking out for himself, was the first to crack under questioning. He named Emeka as the mastermind behind the attack on Mr. Okafor. The day the police came for him, Emeka was in literature class, half listening to a lecture on Chinua Achebe. The door burst open, and two officers entered, their eyes scanning the room before landing on Emeka. "Emeka Okafor," one of them said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent classroom. "You need to come with us." In that moment, Emeka saw his future crumbling before his eyes. He saw Emeka's face, a mixture of disappointment and sadness. He saw his parents, their hopes for him shattered. And for the first time, he felt true fear. Panic took over. Emeka bolted from his seat, pushing past the startled officers. He ran through the hallways, his heart pounding in his ears. He could hear shouts behind him, the sound of pursuit growing closer. In desperation, he smashed through a window, ignoring the pain as glass cut into his skin. He hit the ground running, heading for the fence and the freedom that lay beyond. But he had nowhere to go. As he reached the school gates, he found them locked, trapping him inside. The wail of police sirens grew louder, and Emeka knew it was over. As the officers handcuffed him, Emeka caught sight of his reflection in a car window. He hardly recognized the wild-eyed, bleeding boy staring back at him. How had he come so far from the person he used to be? The police station was cold and unwelcoming, the harsh fluorescent lights making Emeka's head pound. As he sat in the interrogation room, the gravity of his situation finally hit him. He thought of Emeka, of the disappointment in her eyes the last time they spoke. He thought of his parents, who would soon learn that their son was not the reformed boy they believed him to be. He thought of Mr. Okafor, lying in a hospital bed because of Emeka's thirst for revenge. For the first time in years, Emeka felt truly ashamed. The consequences of his actions were severe. Emeka was expelled from St. Augustine's, his dreams of graduation shattered. He faced juvenile detention and a criminal record that would follow him for years to come. When his parents came to collect him from the police station, the look on their faces broke something inside Emeka. His father, once so proud and strong, seemed to have aged years overnight. His mother couldn't even look him in the eye. The ride home was silent, the air thick with disappointment and unspoken recriminations. Emeka wanted to explain, to make them understand, but he knew there were no words that could justify what he had done. The next 2 years were the hardest of Emeka's life. He was sent to a juvenile rehabilitation center, where he was forced to confront the person he had become. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild himself, to find the boy he used to be beneath the layers of anger and rebellion. When he was finally allowed to return to school, Emeka found himself 2 years behind his former classmates. He watched as they prepared for university, their futures bright and full of promise, while he struggled to catch up. Sometimes, he would see Emeka in town. She was studying to be a doctor now, her dream of helping others coming true. When their eyes met, Emeka saw no anger in hers, just a sadness for what might have been. She didn't even look his way anymore, and Emeka couldn't blame her. Chidi and the other night owls were long gone, some to universities, others to jobs or lives Emeka knew nothing about. He was alone, facing the consequences of choices made in the heat of youth and rebellion. But slowly, day by day, Emeka began to find his way back. He threw himself into his studies, determined to make up for lost time. He volunteered at the local community center, working with younger kids to steer them away from the path he had taken. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of his past threatened to crush him, when the temptation to fall back into old habits was almost overwhelming. But Emeka had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, and he was determined to make amends. As he worked to rebuild his life, Emeka often thought back to that night at the Blue Lagoon, when he had toasted to freedom with Chidi.